An old canine, once a hero, now discarded like yesterday's trash. No badge, no handler, just frostbitten paws and empty eyes staring through a glass window. A 5-star restaurant, warm meals inside. And outside? Nothing but snow, hunger, and silence. No one stopped. No one cared. Until he did. A young police officer, battle-hardened by duty but quietly broken inside, looked into the eyes of a dog everyone else ignored. What happened next will leave you speechless. Because this isn't just about a stray dog finding a meal, it's about a forgotten hero helping solve a crime no one could crack, just to thank the man who gave him a second chance. Before we start, tell me, where are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments. And if you believe every animal deserves dignity, not abandonment, hit that subscribe button. Because what you're about to hear will stay with you forever. The town of Silverbrook, tucked beneath the snowy shoulders of northern Colorado, lay buried under its 5th consecutive day of snow. It was the kind of winter that silenced everything: roads, rivers, and hearts. By 9 p.m., the streets had emptied, and the only signs of life came from the orange glows behind cabin windows and the occasional whir of snowplows crawling through the ice-covered roads. On the corner of Main and Halter, where a line of closed shops sat like frozen ghosts, one place remained defiantly lit: Lakeside Grill. A warm, cedar-paneled restaurant, well known among the locals for its elk burgers and firewood pizza, and among out-of-towners for its candlelit ambiance. Tonight, the soft jazz playing inside mixed with the sound of laughter and the rhythmic clink of glasses. Through its large bay windows, one could see servers dancing between tables, families leaning into comfort food, and wine being poured into long-stemmed glasses. Outside, on the icy sidewalk, stood a forgotten Shadow. Shadow, a German shepherd, older than most would guess, hunched near the window. His coat was once a vibrant mix of tan and black, now faded to an uneven dullness marked by splotches of dirt, ash, and snow. His ears, one slightly torn, stood only half alert, weighed down by fatigue and cold. His body was thin, almost skeletal under the thick fur. The tremble in his legs wasn't from fear, but from exhaustion. He stood in place, unmoving, except for the shallow rise and fall of his breath. Shadow's brown eyes, sunken but sharp, watched through the glass. His gaze wasn't fixed on the people, nor the warmth, but the food. Steam rolled off a plate of roasted duck. A child licked honey butter from her fingers. A basket of garlic bread was passed down a table. The smells wafting out through the cracks in the doorway teased memories he could no longer place. Then he raised a paw, stiff and cracked at the edges, and tapped the window. Tap, tap, tap. The sound was light, softer than knuckles, more tentative than begging. A rhythm of habit, as if some part of him still remembered how to signal for help, how to ask permission. No one looked. One man glanced up briefly, frowning. A waiter brushed past the window, oblivious. A couple shifted in their seats to get a better angle for a photo of their dessert. Shadow lowered his paw, but didn't move. He stared on, quietly enduring the cold that pressed against his sides like stone. Snow continued to fall, landing and melting on his ears, his snout, his spine. A few blocks down, walking with heavy steps, Officer Nathan Cole made his way along the frozen sidewalk. Nathan, 32, was tall, clean-cut, but rugged. His thick patrol coat clung to his frame, dark hair peeking beneath a department-issued wool cap. The sleeves of his uniform were dusted with dried road salt. He had just ended his 12-hour shift, one that began with a car accident and ended with a domestic dispute, both unresolved. His boots were soaked through, his fingers numb, even inside his gloves. Nathan was the kind of man who rarely showed what he felt, but not because he didn't feel. He had a deep steadiness about him, a presence that came from growing up too fast. His father, a respected sheriff, had been killed in the line of duty when Nathan was just 11. Since then, Nathan had learned that control, over breath, over tone, over emotion, was its own kind of survival. He didn't mind the snow. He preferred walking after his shift. It gave him distance from the noise, the paperwork, the hum of radios that never quite turned off. As he passed Lakeside Grill, Nathan was about to glance away like anyone else until he heard it. Tap, tap, tap. He stopped. The sound was so out of place, so gentle against the backdrop of wind and winter silence, that for a moment he thought he imagined it. Then he heard it again. He turned toward the restaurant window and squinted. At first, all he could see was the reflection of the street behind him. Then, the shape began to emerge, faintly, almost as if carved from the snow itself. 4 legs, drooping head, pointed ears, a tail still and low. A dog. Nathan blinked, momentarily frozen, not from cold, but from recognition. There was something about the posture, the expression, the patience of the creature on the other side of the glass that pulled at something old inside him. Tap! The dog raised its paw again, and that's when Nathan truly looked. His breath caught. The frost on the restaurant window had begun to melt from Shadow's shallow breath. He stood still, ears drooping from fatigue, nose barely brushing the glass, his paw halfway raised in mid-tap as if unsure whether another try would make a difference. Inside the warmth of Lakeside Grill, a waiter emerged from the swinging kitchen doors, his arms loaded with a heavy tray of half-eaten dishes cleared from a recently vacated table. He was a tall man, perhaps in his early 30s, wearing a neatly pressed white shirt beneath a black vest with the restaurant's logo stitched in gold. His name tag read Tyler, and his brow was perpetually furrowed, his features sharp and impatient. His narrow eyes flicked toward the window as he approached the back door that led to the dumpster out back. He paused mid-step. "Not you again," he muttered under his breath, clicking the latch open with his elbow. He pushed the door wide with a hip, letting in a brief gust of the warm air that mixed with the frigid night. The noise startled Shadow, who stepped back but held his ground. Tyler exited briskly, letting the door swing closed behind him. "Damn mutt," he said louder this time, now only a few feet from Shadow. He tilted the tray forward and with one swift motion, dumped its contents into the metal bin. The clatter of ceramic and leftover food echoed through the alley. Greasy napkins, bits of bread, bones scraped clean, and a near-whole baked potato rolled to the edge of the pile. Shadow flinched, not at the noise, but at the way Tyler's hand moved, swift and dismissive as if casting away something foul. Tyler turned, saw the dog still watching him, and took a step forward. "Scram!" he snapped, stomping toward him. He waved a dish rag in the air as though shooing off a raccoon. "Go on, get out of here." Shadow didn't snarl. He didn't growl or bark. He simply lowered his ears, tail tucked beneath his legs, and took 2 slow steps back. His body curved inward with instinctive submission, not fear, as if this kind of rejection was familiar, expected. Nathan, still standing on the corner half shielded by the falling snow, saw it all unfold. His breath caught in his throat. Something old and raw surged through his chest, not rage, but recognition. He had seen that posture before, not from animals, from people, from himself. It was winter in Ohio 17 years ago. 11-year-old Nathan, standing on the porch in a threadbare jacket, suitcase in hand, while his uncle slammed the door shut behind him. "Go back to your dad," his uncle had shouted, not knowing Nathan's father would never come back. The snow fell that day too, and Duke, the only warm body beside him, had pressed against his side and refused to move. The memory passed like a knife under the skin. Tyler was already turning back toward the restaurant, muttering to himself, "Ugh, disgusting." But Shadow remained still in the snow, not quite gone, not quite staying. His gaze lingered on the heap of food just beyond the metal bin, not daring to approach again. Nathan stepped forward now, the crunch of his boots catching Tyler's attention. The waiter turned with a sigh and tried to smile. "Oh, officer, sorry, didn't see you there. Everything okay?" Nathan didn't answer right away. His eyes were still on Shadow. The dog's frame was even thinner than it had looked from a distance, ribs pressing against the matted fur, paws red from contact with salted concrete. Nathan finally spoke, his voice calm but low. "Was that necessary?" Tyler blinked. "Excuse me?" The yelling, the food toss, the rag. Nathan's tone didn't rise, but it thickened with quiet weight. "That dog isn't causing anyone harm." Tyler shifted uncomfortably, glancing toward the restaurant's security camera above the door. "It's not personal. I've seen him out here all week. My manager says if we let one in, we'll have 20 the next night." Nathan looked at him now, eyes steady, unblinking. "You ever ask where he came from?" "He's a stray. Probably followed the trash route." "No," Nathan said quietly, shaking his head. "That's not a stray. That's a working dog. Or was." He stepped forward and knelt slowly, ignoring the snow soaking through the knee of his uniform. He didn't call out. He just waited. Shadow looked at him, really looked, and blinked. For a moment, his tail twitched, not in wagging, but in silent processing, like an engine trying to remember how to turn over. Nathan didn't reach out, didn't make a sound. His eyes softened as if to say, "I'm not here to chase you off." The dog lowered his head slightly but didn't come closer. Tyler shifted again, now clearly uncomfortable. "Look, I don't mean to be rude, officer, but if customers see him, they might complain." Nathan raised a hand without looking at him. "You can go back inside." Sure." Tyler hesitated, then opened the door and slipped inside, letting the warmth swallow him whole. Snow continued to fall, clinging to the edges of Nathan's hat and settling into Shadow's fur. The dog gave a single, shallow exhale and then, ever so slightly, took one small step forward. Nathan felt the corner of his mouth lift, just barely. He didn't move. He didn't need to. The snow had begun to settle again, a soft curtain draping over the alley behind Lakeside Grill. It fell without sound, without pause, muffling the world into a slow, cold stillness. Shadow stood at the edge of the dumpster, eyes fixed on the pile of discarded food half submerged in frost. His breath steamed gently from his nostrils, each exhale a whisper of need. His stomach tightened beneath matted fur. The hunger clawed at him, ancient and relentless. He licked his lips. Then, cautiously, as though walking into a memory that might vanish if disturbed, he took a step toward the bin. The trash pile was barely a foot away now, soggy bread, scraps of beef, wilted greens, a crumpled napkin with traces of butter. Shadow inched forward again, his body lowered, tail tucked, ears flattened. Every part of his posture begged forgiveness for needing something so basic, for simply existing. Just as he extended his nose toward a discarded potato wedge, the door slammed open. A man burst out, heavy boots hitting the concrete with force. His name was Russ, the kitchen supervisor, mid-40s, stout and red-faced, with grease-stained sleeves and a permanent scowl etched between his brows. Years of working in a fast-paced, high-pressure kitchen had left him impatient, quick-tempered, and proud of his authority over anything behind the swinging kitchen doors. Russ spotted Shadow instantly. "Oh, no!" he barked. "Not this again!" He grabbed a long wooden stirring spoon from a bin near the door, raised it above his head and thrust it downward, not to strike, but to intimidate, hitting the metal side of the dumpster with a loud clang. Shadow flinched hard. His legs buckled slightly as he recoiled, slipping on the icy concrete, landing awkwardly on his hip. He scrambled upright, heart racing, but didn't run. Instead, he stood still, frozen not by fear alone, but by resignation, the kind that settles into creatures who've been pushed away too many times. Russ advanced a step, voice sharper now. "Get out of here, you filthy stray! I swear if I see you digging again, I'll call animal control myself." Across the street, standing beneath the yellow glow of a flickering lamppost, Officer Nathan Cole watched everything. His breath misted in the cold as he stood still, jaw tightening, fists clenched inside his gloves. It wasn't just the scene before him, it was the echo it stirred inside his own memory. Winter, Ohio, a frozen creek, He was 10, walking along the edge of the water where the ice had begun to turn glassy. He stepped too far. The ice cracked with a sound like thunder. In seconds, he was underwater, limbs flailing, unable to scream. The world was blue and white, spinning. Then came Duke. The family's German shepherd had leapt into the water without hesitation, teeth grabbing Nathan's coat, dragging him to the edge with a strength born of desperation. Duke hadn't let go, not even when his legs gave out from the cold. Nathan had survived. Duke had died 2 days later from complications of hypothermia. That moment, the sound of Duke's final whine, the way the family buried him beneath the oak tree in their backyard, it had carved a space in Nathan's heart that never quite healed. And now, watching this old, broken dog cower before an angry man, something cracked again. He stepped into the alley. Russ, mid-shout, didn't notice until Nathan was just a few feet away. "Sir," Nathan called out, voice firm but even. Russ turned, spoon still in hand. "Officer, didn't see you there." Nathan didn't stop walking. He approached calmly, coat glinting with snow, badge clipped to his belt, clearly visible. "You always use kitchenware as a threat?" Russ lowered the spoon but didn't look ashamed. "I wasn't going to hit him, just giving him a scare. It's the 3rd time this week he's been sniffing through our bins." "He's not hurting anyone," Nathan said, glancing at Shadow. The dog had backed further away now, but hadn't bolted. His eyes remained fixed on Nathan, quiet, unsure, and searching. Russ shrugged. "Customers don't want some mud out here while they're eating filet mignon. We're not running a rescue." Nathan pulled his badge slightly into view. "He's not just a mutt, he's canine. Or used to be." Russ blinked. "You serious?" Nathan didn't answer. He turned toward Shadow, then took a slow, deliberate step closer. "Hey," he said, soft as snow falling. Shadow didn't move, but his ears twitched. He was watching, processing. Nathan lowered himself into a crouch, boots creaking slightly beneath him. He didn't reach out. He didn't call again. He simply stayed there, still, grounded, offering space. Russ lingered for a moment, arms crossed, clearly uncomfortable with the silence. "I'll leave you to it," he muttered. "But don't let him hang around. We've got inspections coming." He turned and vanished into the kitchen, letting the door swing shut with a thud. Nathan remained in his crouch. He studied the old dog's face. Scars around the jawline, a healed nick in the left ear, fur matted at the shoulders. But behind it all, those eyes. They weren't wild. They weren't broken. They were waiting. The officer exhaled slowly. "You've seen some things, haven't you, old boy?" Shadow didn't come closer, but he didn't back away either. Between them was a thread. Thin, fragile, but unmistakable. The kind of connection that didn't need words, just recognition. The snow swirled around them, white and quiet. For a long moment, man and dog stood in the same breath. The wind had quieted, the snow now drifting in lazy flakes that melted against the warm glow of Lakeside Grill's entrance. Nathan stood outside the door for a beat, Shadow sitting by his side. The dog's breathing had slowed, but his legs still trembled beneath him. The warmth from inside reached them in faint pulses every time the door opened, carrying with it the scent of baked bread, roasted meat, and cinnamon. Nathan looked down at the German shepherd, ragged, scarred, but still holding his head with a quiet dignity. "Come on," he murmured. "Let's give them something to stare at." He opened the heavy wooden door and stepped inside, snow dusting off his coat and pooling at his boots. The restaurant was full, families chatting over empty plates, couples leaning in close over wine glasses, and the quiet clatter of dishes echoing beneath low jazz. As Nathan entered, heads turned. Not because he was a police officer, but because of what followed him. Shadow limped into the room, paws clicking softly against the polished hardwood. Silence rippled through the restaurant like a sudden draft. A fork clinked against a plate and stayed there. A hostess, no older than 20, stood behind the front stand. Her name tag read Claire. She was petite, with curly auburn hair pulled into a messy bun, her cheeks flushed from the kitchen heat. Her eyes widened when she saw the dog. "Sir?" she began, voice tentative. We can't have animals inside unless they're—" "He's with me," Nathan said calmly, showing his badge with one hand while resting the other gently on Shadow's back. "And he's not just any dog." Claire faltered, unsure, but something in Nathan's tone, soft but resolute, made her nod and gesture toward an empty table near the fireplace. "Of course. Right this way." Nathan led Shadow slowly to the corner table. It was tucked beneath a painting of the nearby Silverbrook trailhead, the fireplace casting dancing light across the walls. He pulled out the chair opposite his own and patted the space beside it. "Sit, partner." Shadow hesitated, then lowered himself to the floor with a slow exhale, tail wrapping around his hind legs. His eyes scanned the room cautiously, but he didn't move to leave. Across the restaurant, a waitress in her 30s watched the scene unfold. Her name was Maya, tall and willowy, with the long brown hair braided over one shoulder and a tired grace to her movements. Years working double shifts and raising 2 kids on her own had made her quietly efficient and deeply empathetic. She approached with her notepad but didn't speak right away. Her eyes landed on Shadow. "Do you want a bowl of water for him?" she asked. Nathan looked up, surprised by the offer, and nodded. "And if the kitchen has any plain cooked meat, no seasoning, he hasn't eaten in days." Maya gave a half smile. "I'll see what we can do." She returned moments later with a stainless steel bowl of water and a small plate of steamed chicken breast. She set it down gently in front of Shadow, who sniffed it but didn't lunge. Instead, he looked to Nathan, who gave a subtle nod. Then, slowly, Shadow began to eat. The murmur of the restaurant resumed, though conversations were quieter now. People tried not to stare, but their eyes kept drifting back. At a nearby table, a little girl stood on her knees in the booth, watching with open fascination. She looked to be around 8 years old, with blonde curls and a winter coat still draped over her small shoulders. Her name was Sophie, and she tugged at her mother's sleeve. "Mom," she whispered, "why is the police officer feeding that old dog?" Her mother, a well-dressed woman in her early 40s named Rachel, with a sharp jawline and a phone she hadn't looked away from since the bread rolls arrived, paused for the first time. She followed her daughter's gaze, met Nathan's eyes briefly, and then looked at the dog. Sophie leaned closer. "Why is he being nice to a dog that looks broken?" Rachel's mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. Sophie slipped down from her booth and padded over toward the fireplace. Nathan noticed her but didn't move. Shadow raised his head, alert but calm. The little girl stopped beside them. She knelt slowly, small hand reaching out. "Can I pet him?" she asked. Nathan looked to Shadow, who didn't flinch. He gave a nod. "If he lets you." Sophie extended her hand, palm open. Shadow sniffed, then lowered his head into her fingers. His eyes closed for a brief moment as she gently stroked the top of his head. "He's soft," she said with a smile. Then she looked up. "Why did you bring him in here?" Nathan rested his arm on the table. "Because he deserves to be warm and full, just like anyone else." Sophie tilted her head, considering that. "Even if he's old?" Nathan smiled. "Especially then." Sophie turned and skipped back to her table, her mother still watching, now visibly blinking away emotion she hadn't expected. Rachel reached for her daughter's hand and held it tighter than before. Nathan turned back to Shadow, who was finishing the last of the chicken. He leaned down, whispering just above the crackle of the fire, "Tonight, you're not a stray, you're my guest." The crackle from the fireplace murmured like an old lullaby as the warmth inside Lakeside Grill settled into every corner of the room. Snowflakes continued their descent outside, soft and relentless, but in here, a fragile peace had formed. Shadow lay curled by the table, his belly finally filled after what was likely weeks, maybe months, of hunger. The plate Maya had brought was licked clean, and a thin trail of steam still rose from the warm steel bowl of water beside him. Nathan sat back in his chair, his hand resting gently on Shadow's back. The old dog breathed evenly now, no longer trembling. His fur, though matted and grimy, had begun to dry, and with every rise and fall of his rib cage, Nathan found himself pulled deeper into something he hadn't felt in a long time. Quiet connection. Then it hit him. The smell. It was subtle at first, just barely drifting through the hum of food and conversation, but it caught Nathan like a memory clawing its way up from deep water. Freshly baked bread. Not just any bread, but dense, hand-shaped rolls, the kind his mother used to make on Saturdays. The scent mingled with roasted garlic and butter, and for a brief moment the restaurant around him disappeared. He was a boy again, sitting cross-legged on the kitchen floor while Duke slept near the oven. His mother had hummed while kneading the dough, and Duke's tail had thumped with every note. Nathan blinked the memory away, but his hand lingered on Shadow's collar, an old leather band, badly worn and cracked. His fingers brushed along the underside, and there, hidden under layers of fur and grime, was a small metallic bump, a microchip. His heart jumped. Shadow shifted slightly as Nathan leaned in, inspecting the area. He didn't resist. In fact, he seemed to lean toward the touch. Nathan pulled out his phone, opened his flashlight app, and angled the light gently under the collar. The bump was small, but unmistakable. Carefully, he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a portable RFID scanner, a device most patrol officers in Silverbrook carried for tagging stolen pets or verifying rescue animals. He had almost forgotten he kept it on him. He pressed the scanner close. A beep. The screen lit up. ID 9C4882CHQCO. Registered name, Shadow. K-9 Unit, Colorado State Police, retired, missing. Handler, Sergeant David L. Moreno. Deceased. Status, decommissioned. No further deployment. Last active log, February 13, 2023. Condition, presumed dead. Nathan's eyes didn't move for a long time. The details hit one by one like slow-moving dominoes. Shadow had served in the Colorado State Police, his handler a sergeant, David Moreno. The name rang faintly familiar. Then he remembered. A news story, 2 years ago. A meth lab in the outskirts of Fort Carson had exploded during a nighttime raid. A sergeant had died on site. His K-9 partner was presumed dead, body unrecovered. But the dog hadn't died. He'd vanished. Nathan lowered the scanner slowly, hand still on the collar. Shadow looked up at him, as if sensing the weight of what had just been uncovered. His eyes, tired and heavy-lidded, searched Nathan's for something. Understanding, maybe, or maybe just quiet permission to keep lying there in peace. "You're not just any old dog, are you?" Nathan whispered. "You were trained. You served. And they left you behind." Across the room, Maya approached again, holding a bread basket and a curious look. "Brought you this," she said, placing the basket down. "They just came out of the oven." Nathan nodded distractedly. "Thanks." She hesitated. "Is he okay?" "He's more than okay," Nathan said quietly. "He's a hero." Maya blinked, not sure if he was being metaphorical or literal. Before she could ask more, another customer called her from across the dining room. She offered a brief smile and excused herself. Nathan picked up one of the rolls and tore it in half. Steam curled upward in soft spirals. He placed one half on a small plate near Shadow, though the dog had already turned his head back toward the fireplace. Not out of indifference, Nathan suspected, but of habit. Shadow had learned not to expect more than he was given. He didn't touch the bread. Not yet. Nathan turned his attention back to the scanner, noting the full ID tag. He typed it into the Colorado State Police K-9 registry on his phone, and within seconds, the full service record appeared. Shadow, badge number 117 K-9. German Shepherd, male, DOB, March 14, 2013. Specialty, explosives detection, suspect apprehension, search and rescue. Active years, 2015 to 2023. Partner, Sergeant David Moreno. Final deployment, February 13, 2023. Incident report, structure explosion during raid on narcotics operation. Handler, K.I. A. K9 missing in debris, presumed dead. There was a photo. Shadow, younger, his coat glossy, his ears upright and proud beside Sergeant Moreno, a tall man with a square jaw and a kind face. They looked solid together, trusted, unbreakable. Nathan's thumb hovered over the screen. 2 years. 2 full years. Had Shadow wandered all this time? From Fort Carson to Silverbrook was nearly 400 miles. Had he been looking for someone? Anyone? Or had he just been trying to survive? Nathan looked down at the dog beside him. Scars, ribs, dirt, weariness, but also strength. Shadow had carried his duty into the silence of the wilderness, and now he had returned, not to the station, not to the badge, but to someone who remembered. The murmurs had grown again. Though Nathan hadn't meant to draw attention, the presence of Shadow had slowly shifted the tone of the restaurant. The quiet clicking of forks had resumed, but it was more tentative now, more self-conscious. Conversations lowered to murmurs. Eyes flickered toward the corner table by the fireplace, where a scarred old German shepherd now lay with his muzzle resting gently on his paws. The scent of roasted chicken still lingered, and next to it, the untouched roll that Nathan had placed there hours ago, now cool. Shadow didn't seem to notice the glances. He had long ago stopped expecting to be welcome in places like this. He remained still, his breathing even, his ribs rising and falling beneath his coat like ocean swells. To anyone else, he might have seemed asleep, but Nathan had begun to understand the dog's silence for what it truly was: vigilance worn thin. Nathan sat with his hand lightly on the dog's back, phone still resting beside his plate, the registry of the Colorado State Police K9 Division still open. He had reread Shadow's service record 3 times. It didn't change. The past had found its way here. The sudden clearing of a throat broke through the warmth like a chill. A man in a tailored charcoal vest, pressed slacks, and a name tag reading Mr. Colburn approached the table. His neatly combed gray hair and stern expression projected professionalism and control. Thomas Colburn, the general manager of Lakeside Grill, had worked at the establishment for over 20 years. Known for his no-nonsense approach, he was respected by the kitchen and feared slightly by the waitstaff. Colburn believed in tradition, reputation, and above all, presentation. He stopped just short of Nathan's table. "Officer," Colburn said with clipped politeness, "I understand the situation here is unique, but we have policies. Animals, regardless of service history, aren't permitted in the dining area. Health code." Nathan looked up slowly. "He's not a stray." "I can see that," Colburn replied. "Still, some patrons have expressed concern." Nathan didn't ask who. He simply glanced around the restaurant. People looked away quickly. Some coughed. Others suddenly discovered the depths of their wine glasses. Colburn's voice softened, but only slightly. "Surely you understand. It's a matter of precedent. If we allow this once—" "I understand," Nathan interrupted. He rose to his feet. "And if you're telling me I have to choose between staying and forcing this dog back out into the snow, then I'll make it easy." He reached for his coat. "I'm leaving." There was a hush. The tables nearest them had gone entirely still. The waitress Maya paused mid-step a few feet away. Claire, the hostess, stood frozen near the entrance. Even the kitchen doors had stilled. Colburn raised an eyebrow. "I'm not asking you to leave, officer. Just the dog." Nathan's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. "He's done more for this country than most people in this room. He was presumed dead in the line of duty. Turns out he survived. Alone. For 2 years. And if you're telling me that his reward is to be thrown back into a snowbank because someone's Pinot Grigio might be slightly less enjoyable, then yeah, I'm leaving." He turned toward Shadow, who had risen now, slowly and uncertainly, ears twitching as if unsure whether danger had returned. And then something small, but profound, happened. A man from a nearby table stood. He was in his late 60s, dressed in a worn tan trench coat and thick glasses. His gray hair was combed neatly to the side, and a military pin gleamed softly from the lapel of his coat. His name was Harold Linney, a retired postal worker and Vietnam veteran. Harold didn't speak often in public places. He walked with a cane from a bad hip, and his hands trembled when he carried coffee. But tonight, he walked over slowly, carefully, and placed a folded bill on Nathan's table. "Dinner's on me," he said softly, voice roughened with time. "For him." He patted Shadow once on the shoulder before stepping back. Nathan blinked. "Thank you." Harold nodded once, then returned to his table without waiting for acknowledgement. There was a moment of stillness. Then, a woman in a dark green turtleneck, Barbara, mid-50s, a school principal with cropped silver hair and a demeanor both warm and steel-edged, rose and stepped forward. "Make that 2 dinners," she said, placing a crisp 20 next to the 50, "and maybe a blanket." Another hand reached across the aisle, then another. A younger man with a leather jacket, a trucker named Dale, dropped a 10. "For the dog who outran a damn explosion." Even Maya, the waitress, pulled out a 5 from her apron and added it to the growing pile. "He saved someone else's life once," she said. "Maybe it's time we return the favor." Colburn watched it unfold with something unreadable in his eyes. His lips pressed into a thin line, his spine straighter than before. For a long second he said nothing. Then he gave a slow nod. "He can stay," he said simply, and walked away. Nathan let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. He sat down again. Shadow lowered himself beside him, resting his head back on his paws. The pile of bills on the table lay untouched. Not for payment, not for charity, but for dignity, for remembrance, and for a dog who had survived everything except being forgotten, until now. The snow had thickened outside Lakeside Grill, painting the street in a quiet, white glow. Inside, the warmth of the restaurant wrapped around Nathan like a long-lost memory. At his feet, Shadow lay curled, belly full, for the first time in what seemed like an eternity. His ribs, once prominent beneath patchy fur, now rose and fell in a calm rhythm. But what struck Nathan the most wasn't the stillness. It was the way the dog had nestled against his boots, as if he'd finally let himself belong. Nathan looked down at the old German shepherd. "You didn't just need food," he murmured. "You needed someone." Just then, the door swung open and a gust of cold air swept through. A man stepped in, tall and lean, with a peppered beard and sharp, hazel eyes. He wore a dark green parka with a patch that read, "Dr. Eli Warren, DVM." Eli had been Nathan's friend since academy days, back when Nathan had been a reckless cadet with too much to prove and Eli had already chosen a quieter path in animal medicine. Eli was known in the town for his calm demeanor and dry wit, often using humor to hide the fact that he cared too much. "Got your message," Eli said as he approached the table. "He the one?" Nathan nodded. "Yeah." Found him outside the window, staring in like he remembered what it was like to be loved. Eli crouched down beside Shadow, his voice gentle but firm. "Hey there, soldier," he said, examining the dog's face and then running his hands along the spine. "May I?" Shadow lifted his head briefly, made eye contact, then rested it again. Permission granted. The room around them had grown quieter as patrons watched the scene unfold. Eli checked the pads of the paws, the ears, and ran a small handheld scanner along the neck where the chip was embedded. "No fever," Eli said softly. "Scars on the neck from a past injury, but they've healed. A few calluses, teeth worn. Old, for sure. But nothing alarming. Lungs are clear, eyes still sharp. I'd say he just needs a warm place and a reason to get up in the morning." Nathan's jaw tightened. "I can give him that." A few tables away, a woman in her 30s sat with her son, Benji, a boy no more than 9. His sandy hair was a mess, his fingers twisted in the hem of his hoodie. His mother, Melissa, was petite with tired eyes that carried months of worry. Benji had been diagnosed with selective mutism and autism spectrum disorder a year earlier. Since then, the world had gone quiet around him. He hadn't spoken a word outside the home, barely even made eye contact with strangers. But something had shifted. As Eli stood to his full height and gave Nathan a light nod, Benji slid out of his seat. Melissa's eyes widened, but she didn't stop him. The boy walked slowly toward Shadow, who was now sitting upright beside Nathan's chair. Shadow didn't move. He simply watched, his tail giving a single, soft thump on the wooden floor. Benji reached out, hesitated, then placed a trembling hand on Shadow's fur. Gasps sounded from nearby tables, not of alarm, but awe. Melissa covered her mouth. Her eyes welled up. That's the first time he's ever... Nathan looked between the boy and the dog. Something unspoken passed between them, something older than words and deeper than gestures. Shadow, sensing the boy's energy, leaned forward and gently nudged Benji's arm with his nose. The boy smiled. It wasn't big or dramatic, but it was the kind of smile that parents remember forever. Eli turned to Nathan. "Well, I'd say he's already earning his keep." Nathan gave a short laugh, not out of humor, but of disbelief. "Yeah, he's doing more than I ever expected." Outside, the wind howled, but inside the air felt warm and still. As the evening wore on, people approached the table one by one. Some offered kind words, others dropped small donations, and a few simply paused to look into Shadow's eyes that no longer seemed hollow. Nathan reached into his coat and pulled out his phone. He tapped in a few numbers, and after a few rings, a voice answered. "Hey, it's me," he said. "I'll need an extra blanket ready tonight, for a guest." He glanced down. Shadow had shifted his body to lean entirely against Nathan's boot. His breathing was steady, content. "You're not just a stray anymore," Nathan whispered. "You're family now." The first snow of December fell softly over the town of Bellwood, blanketing rooftops and quiet streets in gentle white. Nathan stepped out of his modest one-story house near the edge of town, zipping up his coat as the wind whistled faintly between the trees. Beside him stood Shadow. No longer the trembling, skeletal creature from that snowy night weeks ago, but a proud German shepherd with a slow, steady gait and a glimmer of purpose in his aging eyes. Shadow's fur had thickened with care, his ribs no longer visible beneath the coat. Though his movement still carried stiffness from years of wear, the light in his gaze had returned. Each morning, he greeted Nathan with a quiet grunt and a nudge of the nose. Each night, he curled by the foot of the bed, no longer curled in fear, but in contentment. Nathan had signed the adoption papers the morning after the Lakeside Grill incident. Officially, Shadow now belonged to him. Unofficially, the bond had been sealed long before that, in a glance exchanged through glass, in a silent decision made beneath a street lamp. Life settled into rhythm. Nathan returned to patrol shifts. Shadow rode in the back seat of the cruiser, head sometimes poking between the seats, tongue lolling. Most calls were mundane. Noise complaints, speeding, the occasional drunk dispute outside a bar. But one morning, something shifted. They had just finished a routine patrol when Shadow began to grow restless. His ears perked up. He sniffed the air, then let out a short bark, low, deliberate. Nathan glanced in the rearview mirror. "You smell something?" he asked. Shadow stood up, pacing in the back. He pressed a paw against the glass and let out another bark, this one sharper. Nathan pulled over. They were driving near an old construction site, abandoned for over 2 years after the development company went bankrupt. A few skeletal frames of houses stood, half-finished and already crumbling. Most of the area had been fenced off, but kids still snuck in sometimes. Nathan had been here twice in the last year, chasing off vandals. "All right, let's check it out." He clipped the leash to Shadow's collar, but the dog barely waited. He pulled forward, nose to the ground, tail low and focused. His movements were methodical, not frantic, purposeful. He led Nathan past the broken fence, through patches of overgrown weeds and toward one of the half-built homes. The scent trail led them into what would have been a living room. Here, Shadow stopped and growled. Nathan turned on his flashlight. The beam caught something metallic buried under a collapsed plank. He crouched, brushed debris away, and revealed a half-buried duffel bag. Inside were gloves, bolt cutters, a crowbar, and a distinctive wallet with a police department seal. It belonged to Officer Greg Hansen. missing for 6 weeks. Nathan's breath caught. He called it in immediately. Within an hour, the site was cordoned off, evidence teams were sweeping the area, and Shadow was sitting calmly beside him, tail wagging once every few minutes as if he knew what he'd just done. Captain Maria Alvarez arrived on scene, bundled in a tan overcoat and red scarf. Mid-50s, strong-jawed with silver-streaked black hair, she had earned her rank through grit and consistency, not politics. She was known for her attention to detail and a surprising fondness for animals, though she rarely showed emotion at work. She crouched beside Shadow, one hand extended, letting him sniff before she scratched behind his ear. "I heard you found something worth gold, old boy," she said, a rare softness in her voice. Nathan nodded. "He led me straight here, no hesitation." A week later, after a chain of investigation linked fingerprints from the tools to a known burglar, Lyle Hargrove, a 38-year-old drifter with a record of break-ins and suspected arson, another revelation came to light. Lyle's prints had been found on a detonator casing recovered from the 2-year-old blast in Colorado, the one that had reportedly claimed Shadow's former handler and left the K-9 missing. Somehow, against all odds, Shadow had not only survived but had now led investigators to the man responsible. The department scheduled a commendation ceremony for the following Friday. The station's briefing room was transformed for the occasion. A banner read, "Service Beyond Duty." Officers and civilians alike filled the seats. Reporters from the local paper set up in the back. At the front stood Captain Alvarez, badge gleaming. Shadow stood beside Nathan, wearing a freshly polished K-9 vest, this time not as a relic of a past life, but as a symbol of rebirth. Alvarez's voice rang out clear. "Some officers serve with words, some with actions, and some, though they cannot speak, serve with heart, instinct, and bravery. Today, we honor a hero who returned from the shadows to shine light on justice." She bent down and clipped a silver tag onto Shadow's collar. "Shadow, Honorary K-9 Deputy, Bellwood Police Department." The room erupted into applause. Shadow looked around, confused for a moment. Then, slowly, for the first time in public, his tail began to wag. Not the timid flutter of a nervous animal, but a proud, confident swing. Afterward, Nathan walked him out under the winter stars. The snow had started again, falling soft like it had that first night, but now it didn't feel cold. It felt like memory folding into hope. He opened the cruiser door, and Shadow hopped in, stiff but steady. Nathan turned the key, and the red and blue lights flickered across the white road. "You ready, partner?" Nathan asked. Shadow barked once. They drove into the night, not as strangers, not as rescuer and rescued, but as a team. The old dog didn't just find a home, he awakened forgotten memories, stitched together the frayed edges of lonely hearts, and reminded a weary town that some souls are never truly lost. Shadow, once cast aside in the snow, became a quiet sentinel of hope, loyalty, and second chances. In the hush of a winter's grip, one act of kindness unraveled something deeper, a ripple that reached across generations, across wounds too old to name. Perhaps we all have a shadow in our lives, something abandoned that still waits, quietly, to be seen again. So, as you return to your day, whether it's the hum of a morning coffee or the stillness of night, remember that love, like loyalty, doesn't need to be loud to be heard. If this story touched your heart, share it. Someone might need it more than you know. Leave a comment below and let us know where you're watching from. And if you believe animals deserve love, not pain, hit that subscribe button. There are more stories waiting, and your presence here means the world. May God bless you, wherever you are, and may your heart always be soft toward those who cannot speak but feel everything.